Jerry, thanks very much, and it's really I enjoy being here. I left, my wife and I have a home in Alpine in West Texas. Left there yesterday, long plane ride here with all the thunderstorms and thunder bumpers rolling through. Got in about 2 last night, so and then I head off to Seattle today. Seattle for meetings tomorrow, Chicago, then back to Seattle. So my travel schedule's a bit of a challenge, but it's always great to be back in Texas. Yesterday afternoon, sat on the back porch with a gentleman by the name of Joaquin Jackson. I don't know if that's a name that means anything to you or not. Great Texas Ranger is one of my neighbors. And so you talk about change, there's a man who's seen change over his career. You know, he retired about not quite 20 years ago from being a Texas Ranger. But he's got some interesting stories. You walk through and think about all the changes that have gone on. I think that's the challenge we all face today, is that the world has changed and we got to figure out not what the new playbook is, not just how do you go from whether it's UT or A&M, depending upon what side of the fence you're on, what their playbooks are, but I think it's time for some new strategies and some new thoughts. So my intent this morning is to frankly stir the pot a little bit and maybe make us feel a little bit uncomfortable, not because we like feeling uncomfortable, but I am a firm believer change only comes through significant emotional events. And we all look in terms of what's going on around us. We've got to have those significant emotional events ourselves to think about, you know, what change is really necessary and how do we change what's going on. Because frankly, most of us are probably pretty comfortable with what our lives look like, what's going on, but we're trying to drive a population that we're a part of. And I think we've got to look at the resources that are around, the challenges we face, the youngsters growing up and what the implications are. I do like, Jerry, the comment about, you know, the Fort Hood region. I think, you know, Fort Hood is an outstanding resource that's available here in this neck of the woods. And having spent some time in the Marine Corps, I did have the opportunity to spend some time at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, learned how to become an artillery officer. So, so there's a lot that I think we all can learn, and that's what my intent today is, to really, you know, stir the pot a bit about what's going on. What I'd like to do is also provide some facts and figures that, again, will provide some insights and a little bit of background about what I've been doing and what's been going on in the Boeing company, you know, for my 32 years of career. But I think the challenge that we face is that, you know, skills and excellence in student learning in the workplace performance have been declining in a measurable way since 1963. You say, what do you mean 1963? This is kind of new stuff. No, it's not. This has been going on since 1963. When you look at the research and go back to a fellow by the name of Stephen Glenn, started looking at it, says, why since 1963 every high school class in America has had a continued decline in performance. And the challenge is we are not facing a skill shortage, or we're not facing a labor shortage. We've got plenty of people. We are facing a skill shortage. And that's the fundamental issue we have to take a look at, is what are the implications associated with that. My view is, as I think about people, and I've got, between my wife and I, we got 6 kids and 7 grandkids and 2 more on the way. Our challenge as parents, how do we make sure they're ready to go in the economy no matter what's going to go on? And the guy who's going to follow me a little bit later on is going to talk about the future. I'm going to try and set up where we've been, some of the challenges, and then he's going to help you set up about what the future ought to look like. But I believe there's 5 key traits that all people need to have and to think about what the focus is. First is to focus on economic self-sufficiency. They got to earn their own way. I think we focused on this nation for a long time on everyone needs to go to college. That's great, but we also have a $1 trillion debt for our students, and yet how many of those youngsters can't find jobs? And so education is important, but that is not the end to be all. And so I think we got to think about what the implications are for that. I think number 2, everyone needs to participate in the process of self-governance. It's called democracy. And that's the concern that I have, is while I represent the Boeing company with 172,000 employees, we spend $21 billion a year on payroll and benefits, and we've got folks worldwide. You know, the challenge is how do we participate in what goes on in our community? So it's great to see organizations like this. I think everyone needs to be successful in terms of how they communicate, both orally and written. They need to understand that it's all about learning, unlearning, and relearning as life goes on. And last but not least, I think everyone needs to focus on the future. My sense is, and this is what I try and think about, if every one of our citizens recognize those 5 items, the top one in my mind being the most important, that they're responsible for their own well-being, not the government, we'll be far better off in terms of where we're going. You know, when Martha grabbed me up in Washington, D.C. here a few months ago, I made comment about there are 14 million people that are unemployed, and yet there are 3 million jobs going open in the U.S. today. And my sense to that organization was it's very simple. The measure of success is when those 3 million fill some of those 14 million jobs. And so it's more than about this notion about people wanting to work. It's about, do they have the skills, capability, and capacity to go do that. Now in Boeing, we have 172,000 employees, hired 18,000 people last year. On our way to hire another 14,000 this year. And I know there's huge challenges. We'll get 2.7 million resumes this year to fill those 14,000 jobs. And so, how we work through it is a really important element. But again, the challenge we face is that we have youngsters who don't have the skills and the capabilities to go fill the jobs that are out there. Now, as a nation, we've been focusing on education. Public education is the best opportunity to build skills that people need to compete for the future. I think that's only part of the solution, and I think we cannot rely solely on what goes on in the educational process. We spend over $550 billion a year on the K-12 education system, more per student and more per nation than any other one in the world. Yet, here are some chilling statistics. Some 23 million American adults are functionally illiterate by the simplest test of everyday reading, writing, and comprehension. About 13% of all 17-year-olds in the United States can be considered functionally illiterate. Functional illiteracy among minority youth can run as high as 40%. The average achievement of high school students on most standardized tests is now lower than 26 years ago. I'll say that again. It is now lower than it was 26 years ago. This is not something that just started happening yesterday. This is the boiling frog syndrome. You kind of heat up the water, you throw the frog in one, and the kind of frog eventually boils. You throw the frog in the hot pan, what happens? It's going to jump out. This has been going on for the last 3 or 4 decades. Another important statistic, over half of the population of gifted students do not match their tested abilities with comparable achievement in school, which says we have a mismatch about what's going on with the gifted programs and their ability to be successful from an educational standpoint. The College Board Scholastic Aptitude Test, or the SAT, which you're all familiar with, demonstrates a virtually unbroken decline from 1963 to 1980. Average verbal scores fell over 50 points, and average math scores dropped by over 40 points. And as I talked about, our nation's college graduates have accumulated over $1 trillion in debt because of student loans to attend college, and yet the question is, how many are still looking for jobs? And so I'd point to a couple other interesting statistics that have gone on around us. What's an important event that we all recall in the mid to late 80s? The wall coming down in Eastern Europe. An important factor that really added democracy to about 200 million people in Eastern Europe. But the other thing that occurred at the same time that I think we all missed, and that's the explosion of the internet. The explosion of the internet, where information that we all had to be able to do our jobs and to be able to compete in the global marketplace got added to about 2 billion additional people. And what have those 2 billion people been doing? They've been competing with us ever since. Okay? And as they focused on their desire to improve, perform, they didn't worry about what the rules were. They just said, we're going to go compete. And how did we see it in communities? And whether it's in Alpine, Texas, or right here, or any other state around the nation, we begin to see this whole notion about jobs moving and jobs moving overseas. And this whole notion about how do you go compete in the market? Because information is out there, and what's the economy want? It wants high quality, low cost. And that's what it's going to continue to drive towards. And so this whole internet explosion says the world changed and many of us missed it. Okay, many of us missed it, and so jobs going overseas is not a reflection of you just got to buy and build in America. It's got to be, you got to be able to compete in the marketplace. Look at Caterpillar. You know, the Cat folks, what do they run into? Heavy labor unions, and what did they drive? They said, hey guys, we got to go compete in the marketplace, because who was eating their lunch? The foreign producers of heavy equipment. Now, we can just look in the U.S. Where's steel being produced today? Not predominantly in the United States. Look at what's going on in the automakers. Okay, what was the big three are now 2 of 7. Okay, because one got absorbed. And those other 2 are not nearly as strong as they were before. If you look at what goes on in the Boeing company, what's our concern is making sure we can continue to compete in the marketplace. Now, we in the Boeing company, last year we delivered 479 airplanes. This year we're on track to deliver 600 airplanes. We're fortunate we have a backlog of $300 billion of airplanes, another $70 billion in our defense business, about $370 billion backlog. And you know, we're a company that delivers, in terms of from a price standpoint, about $65, $70 billion of product a year. So the good news is we're in good shape for quite some time. However, while we all know about the competition between the Boeing company and Airbus, what we would know as the duopoly, there's a couple other firms trying to eat our lunch in that area. If you look at what's going on in Canada with Bombardier, if you look at what's going on at Embraer down in Brazil, you look at what's going on in China with Comac, all trying to take their regional jets, which we all fly on occasionally, but that represents about 5% of the market. About half of the commercial airplane business is the 737 size airplanes. And so they're all trying to upscale their size aircraft to be able to get half that market. And they're not looking for a duopoly. They're trying to get in to be able to have 4 or 5 competitors in the 737 size market. Our challenge, always work the competitive marketplace, work with our customers, and make sure we got the workforce to be able to meet our needs. But just give some sense about this global economy and marketplace that is like we've never seen before, and it's never going to go back to the way it was before. So we have a choice. We adapt and move forward, or we'll lose in the process. I can tell you, at least from the Boeing company standpoint, we're adapting. And we already have relationships with Comac. We already have a relationship with Embraer. We already have relationships, and watch what's going on Bombardier. Oh, and I forgot there's a 4th one out there, the Russians with Sukhoi, as they try and develop their next regional jet into a commercial airplane. So as I think about the internet, let me also raise something that's an important element, because I think it's foundational to what we all need to do going forward, and particularly the communities we're part in. And it has to do with technology and computer-based learning. Our children spend an average of 50 hours a week tied in one form or another to the media, by computer, by TV, by tablet, by cell phone, or by video game. In fact, it's a big business. But the question is, what's the effect of that amount of time, generally in the sitting position, using only the tips of fingers to drive communication? What impact is it having on our youth? And I would contend it's a huge crisis. Well, let's see, we have widespread obesity, we have an increase in type 2 diabetes, we have increased visual nearsightedness, a significant growth in hearing loss in people under 21. We have arthritis in hands in people who are less than 18 years old. We have increased bone fractures in youngsters, poor athletic ability, can't wrap a hand around a baseball in a glove, kick a soccer ball while moving. And let's think about our own kids and our own grandkids and have to ask ourselves, what situation are they in? How many of us are grandparents? How many of you have seen a difference in some of the little ones that we all call our loved ones and what's going on with them? How many of you walk into, I know Starbucks is kind of big up in Chicago or Seattle. I don't think there's too many Starbucks here, but I'm sorry? Oh, you got them? Okay, so how many of you walk in and think about it next Saturday or Sunday or whenever in the morning you walk in and look and see if there's a couple parents with the youngsters sitting there and look at what they're doing. My wife and I are cyclists. We like to ride tandem bicycles, and we'll occasionally go on a 100-mile bicycle ride. So it's a way we get our exercise, and we'll swing by Starbucks in the morning, and well, we were there a few weekends ago, and I'll be doggone, there's a man and a woman, and there looks like their 3-year-old daughter, And what are they all on? They're all on their iPads. They're not talking, they're not interacting, the little girl's playing games. See, I would contend those are some fundamental issues, and those are problems that schools cannot fix. And I would raise an issue, and there's an article last week in the New York Times that talked about, is it okay for kids to play on computers? I contend no. Until kids are like 7 or 8, keep them away. Because I'll ask you, the argument is, well, Rick, the kids got to play with the computers. Our world's all about computers. And I would say, how many kids who've never seen a computer have you given one to and they've not got it figured out in 15 minutes? And I would contend that's a huge challenge that we as parents and we as a society have to think about. Because as we think about what's going on in raising youngsters, it's about real life experiences. And I'm going to talk more about that because I think it's critical going forward. But this whole notion about kids, and I'd say, how many of you are baseball coaches or soccer coaches? Okay? Have you watched the youngsters coming out recently and what you have to do to get them ready and how much time that, whether it's swinging a baseball bat at T-ball or kicking a soccer ball? These are fundamental issues that are all about getting the kids outside and not allowing them to be on the inside, and that's not going to happen in the classroom because schools cannot fix the fundamental physical problems that we have, and our teachers can't solve those problems either. And so I think that's a huge challenge we have to think about, particularly when teachers today find themselves in a classroom with as many as 15 learning disabled kids or kids that have special needs half the classroom. So let's talk about some more data. School districts have been actively screening 4- and 5-year-olds before entering a classroom. We're finding up to 70% of those youngsters are as much as 2 to 2.5 years developmentally delayed. We expect them to show up at 5 years old ready to go into kindergarten. They're showing up with the age equivalency of about 2 to 2.5. So when are these children supposed to catch up? So I would contend as a nation, for the past 50 years, we have focused on, as a nation, focused on education, trying to solve the problems through school. And I would invite you, if you're interested, take a look at the Woodrow Wilson Center. I gave a presentation that talked about what's gone on in education fundamentally over the last 60 years. We are a nation focused on education, the right thing, but that's not going to solve our problems. So I suspect, like me, we're all feeling a little bit uncomfortable about this whole focus on education, which is certainly an important element, but that cannot be the only solution because it's not where the problem is. Not unlike in the Boeing company, as we think about building airplanes, and we'll have a new composite airplane coming out, the Dreamliner, and the first one will start flying in the U.S. come October because of the foresight of Continental, now part of United. That first one will start flying, but we build most of our airplanes still with aluminum and put rivets in them. And I can tell you, we know where the bauxite comes from every rivet that we're building. And why is that important? Because we all demand excellence in the products we build, otherwise we don't get on those airplanes and put our lives in the hands of those who build airplanes. I would contend if we thought the same thing enough about our children and the development for them, would be far better off. In fact, let me ask, how many of us spend more time learning about how to raise our dogs than we do about our children? Okay? And that's not an indictment, it's just kind of a statement about where are we and what are the implications associated with that. Now, Christopher Columbus. We all know Christopher Columbus, at least all of us in this room do. If you went out, some of the school kids, you'd wonder who was Christopher Columbus. I'm not sure if they're teaching or not, but he had a contrarian view about what needs to go on in terms of searching for the new world. His view was the world is round, not flat. You're not going to sail to the end of the earth and fall off. And he's just trying to get a shortcut to India. Well, he found America along the way, but fundamentally came to the conclusion there's a different way of looking at things, and he changed everyone's view about the world. I would contend we all need to be more like Christopher Columbus to think about this is not about just fixing education. This is about getting our society ready to go compete in the marketplace. And if we're able to do that, we will in fact have a way forward. And I would suggest that this conference and many others I have the opportunity to participate in It's really those important discussions that need to occur about what's going on and what do we need to do to go forward, and line up around what are our values, what are our visions, what are our measures of success, and how we go forward. Now, I've spent most of my career not leading human resources for the Boeing company. I spent most of my career leading businesses and making sure that I had people that could do the jobs that I needed to make sure we got done going forward. One of the challenges, though, that we face as a business today, and other important statistics, it used to take us 6 weeks to be able to take someone out of high school to train them to be able to go in the factory building airplanes, just to get started. It now takes us 13 weeks. Kids are great at manipulating their thumbs. They're not good at spatial recognition. They're not good at how to put things together. Many don't know what a screwdriver, a drill bit, wire, or wire assemblies are. And so as we think about what's going on in the classroom, in fact, I've been around a long time, and many of you probably have, but how many of you had home ec or wood shop or metal shop or drafting in high school? Okay? How many of us have those in the classroom today? None of us. Why? Because we're all trying to send our kids to college. And yet, and I'm going to be a contrarian here, not everyone needs to go to college. I have 172,000 employees in the Boeing company. Only half of those jobs require a college education. And I would contend if we thought more about what do we want to do to get a job in the economy first and then get the education to go with it, we can go forward. But now I'll make us all feel uncomfortable. So how many of us are going to tell our kids not to go to college? Okay? These are the fundamental important things that I think are at the heart about how we go forward, because we've convinced ourselves college is the way to go forward. Now, I'm not saying continued education is not the way to go forward. I'm a mathematician by education and training. Thank goodness the Marine Corps paid for my way to go to school. And I have a master's in computer science. And I have most of my work in an MBA, so I've always continued to focus on the education. But my first education started with Dad. See, Dad was when he came out of the Marine Corps after spending time with the Chosin Reservoir, he was a truck driver, one of the last ones out, very difficult conflict, became a general contractor. He said, "Rick, I'm going to put you to work." And at age 7, I started working for Dad. First, he was a mason, so I learned to haul a few blocks around. Then I learned about how to nail some wood into floorboards as he's building houses. But for him, it was very simple. He says, "I got to teach you, Rick, a very simple concept. Everything comes to he who waits, so long as he who waits works like hell while he waits." Okay? Very simple. And I think that's the challenge we as parents have to think about relative to our kids. Because, if we think about the great generation, we all know the great generation, World War II. They went off to war, they faced huge challenges, huge odds, and they came back successful. That's allowed this nation to continue. But when they came back, they looked and said, we never want our kids to have a challenge like that again. And so they begin to work their way through and systematically make life easier. I contend, like my dad believed, that all growth comes through challenge, and if we're not challenged, we don't have the opportunity to grow. So I think the challenge that we face today in society is not in the classroom, it starts with us. It starts with what we do in raising our kids. Now, unfortunately, Dad passed away a couple months ago. But like all in the military, and you all learn, particularly when you're at Fort Hood, military has coins. Dad has a coin. On one side's the Marine Corps he dearly loved. The other is our heritage. We're Native American. Another short story is as a Native American, I was tribal chairman. Dad says, "Rick, it's time for you to go learn outside the Marine Corps, be a tribal chairman. You got to lead the family." Now, how many of you have families of about 800 people? Okay, and so when you're on the reservation, a little tough when you're trying to lead a family of 800. We have 13,000 acres in North San Diego County, and it's a real opportunity, and we're pretty poor. Because the Bureau of Indian Affairs very simply said, for the 600 tribes in America, we will ensure that we take care of you and provide for you, and when you are economically self-sufficient, we will allow you to declare your independence. That was the strategy. Okay? Worked for a long time. My view was, hold it, we're dirt poor. We don't have anything. You know, we're trying to put houses on tribal land for family members who, you know, are living in huts because you can't get enough money from the federal government. You got to change the game. So my approach was, it's time to change the strategy. We're going to flip it around. We're going to declare our self-determination first, and out of that will come economic success. Well, hey, I'll take the luck that went along with it, because we did exactly that. The good news was Indian gaming came in just about the right time. Okay? And you never know where those opportunities are going to be. But if you change your mindset and change the perspective, you start thinking differently about what's going on. Fortunately today, we have a 525-room hotel. We got 2,600 slots. We send all our kids to college. The challenge we face right now is our kids have too much. We went from poor to being very successful. And I would contend that's the next crisis we in the Indian nations are going to face. And I contend that those who have need to help make sure that those who don't understand the way forward. Well, my experience in terms of learning about workforce of the future, I said, went back to when I was leading the space shuttle business. I used to lead that out of Downey, California. I had operations in Downey, out of Palmdale, Houston, down in Florida, and Huntsville. Yeah. And it was a great time in my career, particularly the space program. It's when a great American, John Glenn, had the opportunity to fly for the second time in space aboard Space Shuttle. But I met someone there at that time who was not a business leader, but she was an educator and a communicator. I called her a Keplerian Scientist after Johannes Kepler, who was widely respected for his observational style of learning. She observed and then, like Kepler, called on mathematics to support his finding. She then compiled and tested a set of principles about success in human growth and development that she's been demonstrating years over years over years of the observations. See, one of the challenges we face in development is we got a lot of experts in education, and I'm not belittling the experts in education, what goes in the classroom. We really do need the expertise that goes on. But again, this is not about fixing everything through education. And what this lady did is help provide me, a business leader, and perspective about how do you move forward and think about this whole broader integrated perspective about raising children and getting them ready for the workforce. It was, in fact, a very strong systems perspective. And it's an imperative that we look at the principles that are in today about throughout a child's life, not just what goes on in the classroom, much like Dad did for me that says, hey Rick, I'm going to work your tailbone off so you really recognize the work ethic. Now I have to tell a story on myself a little bit. You know, I worked for Dad for a lot of years, all the way up through and getting into college, and but I learned a very important lesson about what it means to work. See, Dad fired me 4 times. And that's kind of a tough lesson when you go home to Mom and says, Mom, I got fired. She says, who fired you? Dad. She says, well, you know, go to your room, you know, go figure your life out. Because she was not very supportive in that area. And, you know, and one could say, well, I'm a slow learner, and I would agree with that. But the whole notion was this learning through experience and learning about real value. And I go back to this notion about learning through experience. You know, think about computers and think about what goes on with computers. Are those about experience, or are those about just gaining information? I contend it's the latter, not the former. Think about what we all do. We use the computers to gather information. It is phenomenal, a phenomenal tool. You know, as I was coming in here, I turned off my BlackBerry, turned off my iPhone, and all my communication devices that I had to be able to interact and gather information. But that's not how I run the business. It's through relationships, it's through experience, it's about hands-on doing real things. And if I go back to my space shuttle days, and you think back to Apollo and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin land on the moon, you know, where did those 2 gents come from? They came off farms. We had a couple, 3 million people who built Apollo. They didn't come off computers. They came from the real world. They came from their hands-on experience. And I think the part that we missed over the last number of decades is that this nation was founded upon people who were self-determinate, self-reliant, and had solved problems each and every day. And then the youngsters went to school and they gained additional technical knowledge and insights that they could use to balance out their real-world experiences going forward. That was the key element. And when we brought computers in, we took away the real sense and real perspective. Now, there's a program called iLabs at the University of Washington. It's really an outstanding program looking at what the implications are on computers, on neurological development. Now, in my spare time, I do spend an awful lot of time in that area. What's going on neurologically in the brain? And what iLabs has been able to prove, which many of us have known for quite some time, is that the light goes in the brain from a computer differently than in the real world. iLabs has done some very simple experiments because of the technology today to measure brain interaction and what's going on in each of the regions of the brain. They put a skull cap on babies, this simple little skull cap, put the babies in their carrier, and then have mom and dad come talk to the babies. And the first they do is they do it over a computer. And you measure the brain interaction. And then you take it away from the computer and you put the real mom or dad there. Let me tell you, the interaction that goes on with the real person is very simple, because everyone says, I want the real brain interaction, I don't want the computer-generated one. And what you find is, when you get light off a light screen, it goes in your brain differently. It literally goes in and gets stored in a different way than between the real world and what goes on in the light screen world. Now, this is going to be a huge debate in our country, a huge debate. But I can tell you, in my family, the 7 grandkids and the 2 more on the way, they don't see a computer, they don't see a TV until they are 7 or 8 years old. And all of our grandkids read at the age of 3. In fact, my youngest one, Talise Zenobia, Telly's 6 months old now. She's already signing to mom, communicating back and forth about what goes on in terms of wanting to eat or cleaning the diapers, all the other things. And I would contend all of our kids have this capability and capacity. And I think the biggest challenge we have is, how do we, as adults, help our youngsters who are having kids understand what really goes on in terms of developing our children? Now, I led a group in Southern California called the Workforce Steering Committee for the Orange County Business Council. And we took a look at the high school performance of the Santa Ana Unified School District right next to the high school performance in the Irvine Unified School Districts. These are all in Orange County, 26 school districts in Orange County. They all have the same textbooks, the same curriculum, all the same sorts of things. Yet, the college readiness rate, Santa Ana Unified School District, 17%. College readiness rate, right next door, Irvine, 80%. You say, hey, what's going on? This is a very simple thing to go off and work, and what we found is it wasn't what was going on in the classroom, it's what was going on outside the classroom. Now, the other piece of data, Santa Ana, heavily Hispanic, and you'll think about the culture from a Hispanic perspective. Teachers are important, and particularly in the Hispanic community, teachers are respected much like doctors. And so the parents assumed the teachers knew exactly what was going on. The parents never interacted with the school. Right next door in Irvine, heavily Asian and Anglo, and they said, we are going to be in the middle of what our kids are doing each and every day in the classroom, and we're going to make sure they are doing their work at home. So we looked and says, hey, what goes on in one culture isn't going to work in another culture. We started something called the Latino Educational Attainment Project. Worked with Orange County Register, Maria Saqueta and Joe Ames, and brought the press in, and then we got together with the church and went and spent time in the Catholic community, and we started this fundamental transformation about how do you educate parents. And guess what? 5 years later, same curriculum, nothing changed in the high school, same curriculum, doubled the college readiness rate from 17 to 34% in 5 years. And it was a huge transformation that occurred not in the classroom, but went on outside the classroom, because parents got engaged, parents got involved, and they looked and says, we can in fact make a difference. So I propose that as we think about all these things going on, that if we continue to head down the same path we're on right now, and my biggest worry for this nation is 20 years from now, with all the work that's going on in education, we're going to be no better off than we are today. In fact, if we continue the same glide slope, we will be worse, because we have been for the last 50 years. We have been for the last 50 years. And so I do think it requires a different strategy, and strategies fundamentally needs to start at the local community level. That's why my compliments to all of you about what's going on. And I think a strategy's got to be back to, first and foremost, who's accountable for our kids. It's not the schools. It's us as parents. It's us as communities. That's where it starts. Schools are a piece. But we got to help create opportunities, environments for them. We got to educate parents. We got to help them understand about childhood development, why it's so important for the early years to be able to develop them to go forward. And then we in businesses have to think about how we're going to create opportunities for them, whether, putting them to work. And I know these are not easy things to go off and do. But I think if we take a look at, and I don't know what the unemployment here is in this community. I don't know what is the unemployment right now. I know in the state of Texas we're running about 6 or 7%. 7%, okay. So, and I also know that we're probably paying more for unemployment than we want to. Okay, we probably have more people on some form of welfare than we want to. And I think it's time we start taking a look at, for those that we're giving things out to, what do we expect of them in return? What do we expect of them in return in this process? Because if we're going to pay them, let's put them to work doing something. Okay, in fact, how are we doing in terms of, is there anyone in here who has too much money in their budget? No, probably not. Particularly at the city level, as we're looking at, do we have enough people to get our jobs done? No. Do we have enough tax revenue? No. Yet we have greater and greater demands on the services that we need. I contend there's an opportunity. There's a workforce that's available. They may be skilled or unskilled, but there's an opportunity to put them to work. If we're already giving people money for unemployment, I think it's time to change the game. So it really is a different playbook, one that we've not had before. But it starts with a whole different strategy about how we're going to go forward, and getting some alignment about what do we expect of our youngsters. I've already told you what we expect in the Stevens household, whether it's children or grandchildren. And while I can't think about, those are things we all have to work personally, but I do think these are the discussions that need to go around the tables at home. Because I can tell you, I'm not worried about any of my grandkids having jobs. They'll all have jobs. What will those jobs be? I have no earthly idea. But it starts with the expectation they're going to be responsible for their economic well-being. And when it starts there, as opposed to, hey, we're going to give you an education over there's jobs. I have no idea what the job is going to be. In fact, how many of you had a computer on your desk 30 years ago? Okay? How many of you have one on your desk now? Okay, can't live without them. Okay? How many of your kids or grandkids have computers in their room? Okay? And how many of those kids are playing outside or running around on skateboards? In fact, let me ask you, how many thought you were going to kill yourself by doing something dumb when you were growing up? Okay, we all did. Okay? Whether it's jumping off the roof or swinging on a tree or doing something. Okay? Okay? And I know you don't want to ask your kids or your grandkids that question. What did you do dumb yesterday that thought you was going to injure yourself? But just think about the experiences they're having, and I would contend one of the strategies is start managing the media input. Get them off the computers. Get them off the TVs. Get them off the Game Boys. Now, those are tough things to go have discussions with as parents, with kids, because I know the stories. Well, all my other friends have them. Why can't I? But I would contend this is about the long-term capabilities we're trying to raise our kids for, to go compete in a world where, frankly, 3 billion people want what we have in America. They want it. Okay? And they're going to get it. Okay? They're going to get it. Because if you look at China, look at India, we produce 72,000 engineers a year in this country. 72,000. They're producing nearly 1 million a year. Okay? Now, one can argue about the quality. Okay? One can argue about the capabilities. But I would contend anytime you get 10 times the amount of people focusing on the same problems we're focused on, guess what? They're going to win. They are going to win. Okay? Think about going back to World War II. Who had the technology advantage in World War II? The Germans did. There's no doubt about it. Back there, the foundation for our space program. They all came over and helped us. What did we bring to the table? We brought the can-do know-how and we brought volume. Okay? The difference back then was we had all the information. Now everyone's got it because of the internet. So the game has fundamentally shifted and fundamentally changed. So it is time for a new strategy, and I contend it's got to involve 6 key stakeholders. It's got to involve business, education, the government, media, community leadership, and it's got to involve parents. Because that's what we're trying to drive. We're trying to drive the behavior in terms of helping kids be successful going forward. Now let's talk about some examples about, but Rick, you're talking about parents, and my God, parents got 2 or 3 jobs. You know, the economy's tough enough. There's a school, an elementary school in Indiana called the Banneker Elementary School. All the kids who come there are on free breakfast, free lunch, and most of them take backpacks home for dinner. Why? Because the parents are all off working multiple jobs. Very poor, depressed area. Okay? Yet, Banneker Elementary has been the top 10% of elementary schools in Indiana for the last 20 years. Top 10%, in many cases, #1. Valedictorian at Harvard came out of Banneker Elementary 3 years ago. They said, hey, if we're going to get people involved in the classroom, parents are too busy, let's bring in the grandparents. They brought the grandparents in. Okay? What child would not love their grandparents walking down the hallway? It's there's grandma or grandpa. They're taking care of me. And guess what? When the kid screws up, boy, that feedback zips right back to the parents. Okay? What were you doing in school? Hey, grandma just said, no. Oh, what are you going to do next? I got it. Okay? It's also a phenomenal leader at that school, Sarah Gibbons, who does a great job. And these facilities are not exactly what I call bang-up facilities. She does not have a desk. Sits out in the hallway, or she doesn't have an office. Her desk is in the hallway. She's in every classroom every day, and those teachers are phenomenal in terms of what they're doing for those kids. It's examples like that where we're bringing the community together with all the stakeholders, with the parents to be involved and engaged going forward. And we just happen to be one of the businesses that works with them. We spend time there, okay, making sure those kids are successful. But I think when you bring those 6 groups of stakeholders together, we start getting different solutions. But there's no doubt there's opportunities to improve education, but that is not the solution. I contend, and all the facts in my view tell us we've been doing this for the last 10 years, and so, or the last 5 decades. I think if we think about, again, kids, what do we need to do to be able to help them? Get them off the computers, okay? Get them out in real world engaged activities, and then ensure that, you know, children are responsible for making their own decisions, and they do that when they're out playing. They do that when they're out playing. We're not supervising. Okay? And are there bloody brawls and fights and bloody noses and cut knees and all that? Of course there are. Okay? Are there some issues? But I think it's a different way to go, and one that's got to be successful going forward. So I think it's time to take a fresh look at what's going on, where we're at. But I would contend if we keep on the same path, you know, I think, you know, it's Einstein gets credited, you know, with the definition of insanity. I'm not sure exactly, but you know, the phrase goes something like this: if we keep doing the same thing, expect different results, that's the definition of insanity. I would contend we've been doing this same thing for the last 6 decades. We are getting the same results. It's time to make a change, and it's communities like this that have the opportunity to go off and do that.